Here I am, the law. Those were the first words Karen, the HOA president, screamed as she called 911 on me the day I moved into my dream lakeside cabin after 10 years grinding as a game developer, saving every penny for a slice of peace by the water. I thought I'd finally escaped the chaos of the city. I spent $500,000 on a small cabin by a crystal clear lake, picturing mornings coding while sipping coffee, watching the sunrise ripple across the water, and nights sitting on my porch, breathing in freedom I'd worked a decade to earn. The moving truck backed down the gravel drive, and I was unloading boxes of computers and a standing desk, sweat on my forehead despite the cool lake breeze. For the first time in years I thought, I actually did it. Then Karen showed up. She didn't need to introduce herself. She walked down the street like she owned it, her eyes scanning everything with the cold precision of an IRS auditor. My moving boxes, the truck, even the way I stood on my own driveway. Karen, late 50s, silver hair in a tight bun, crisp white blouse and khaki pants, carried the vibe of a professional. Let me speak to your manager. Enforcer. Her eyes were the first thing you noticed, calculating, taking in every detail like a general preparing for battle. She stopped, pointed at the truck. Your truck is blocking traffic. I glanced around at the completely empty street, birds chirping in the trees, the lake glinting under the sun, before looking back at her, confused. Before I could even respond, Karen pulled out her phone and dialed 911 calmly, like she'd done this 100 times before. I need to report a commercial vehicle blocking the street in Lakeside. I froze, a box of computer gear still in my arms, watching this woman call the cops on me for moving into my own house. I tried to reason with her. Ma'am, I can move it right now if it's an issue. She held up one perfectly manicured finger to silence me, ignoring me completely as she described me as an uncooperative driver. To the dispatcher. Uncooperative. I hadn't even had the chance to cooperate yet. Karen hung up, turned to me with a cold smile that didn't touch her eyes. Welcome to the neighborhood. She took a step closer, eyes locked on me. I'm Karen, president of the HOA. And then she said it, softly but with terrifying confidence. Here I am, the law. 10 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up. Officer Johnson stepped out, glanced at Karen, then at the empty street, and sighed like he'd done this 1,000 times. What's the issue today, Karen? That's when I realized I had just stepped into a war I didn't know existed. After the police fiasco on moving day, all I wanted was to forget about Karen and get back to building the quiet lakeside coding life I had dreamed of. I unpacked boxes, set up my workspace by the window facing the lake, and imagined mornings coding while the sunrise painted gold on the water. But Karen wasn't done with me. 3 days later, I decided to apply for a permit to build a small dock. Nothing fancy, just a simple 8-foot wooden platform where I could have coffee, fish like my dad used to, and maybe launch a kayak. I spent 2 entire evenings studying HOA guidelines, city codes, environmental regulations, measuring distances, sketching detailed architectural plans, and even writing an environmental impact assessment to ensure I did everything by the book. When I submitted my application, it was a 23-page masterpiece filled with precise blueprints, materials, and compliance notes. That same afternoon, I received an email, application denied. Missing comprehensive environmental impact study. I stared at the screen, stunned. I had submitted an assessment but, a comprehensive, in Karen's world clearly meant something else. Determined, I hired a stern environmental consultant in her 60s for $800 who conducted water tests, soil sampling, pH readings, and cataloged local wildlife, producing a 47-page report concluding, the proposed dock will have an environmental impact comparable to a large bird landing on the water. She included charts of water levels over the last 5 years, wildlife interviews with neighbors, and detailed measurements of current flow. She was more thorough than a NASA mission planner, for a dock smaller than most kitchen tables. I submitted, confident Karen had no further reason to reject it. 2 days later, rejection arrived again, application denied. Proposed materials not aesthetically compatible with community standards. I had specified pressure-treated lumber, the same used for the community dock. Fine, I could play this game. I drove to the most expensive lumber yard in town, upgraded to premium cedar, adding another $500 to the cost. Rejection number 3 came swiftly. Application denied. Structure may cause visual offense to lake enjoying residents. A visual offense. It was a tiny dock. Not a billboard or a chemical plant. That's when I realized this wasn't about regulations or aesthetics, it was about control. Karen wasn't enforcing community standards, she was testing how far she could push me. But I wasn't ready to give up. I redesigned the dock to be a tiny 6-stick platform, barely enough for a folding chair, invisible from the road or even the lake. Surely they couldn't reject something so small. They did. Application denied. Pending written approval from 75% of neighborhood residents. So, that Saturday, I walked door to door, explaining my tiny dock to neighbors, hoping to collect signatures. Some were sympathetic but shook their heads. We don't want to get on Karen's bad side. The elderly couple with kayaks laughed softly. Good luck. We've been trying to repaint our fence for 3 years. That's when I met Walter, a 72-year-old retired professor 4 houses down. His weathered face and calm demeanor hinted at a man who had seen too much of Karen's drama. As I explained my dock plans, Walter gave me a look of caution mixed with pity. Son, he said, glancing toward Karen's house, anything involving the lake here is complicated. The way he said, complicated, felt like a warning about something deeper. After days of knocking on doors, I managed to collect signatures from about 60% of residents. Not enough to meet the supermajority, Karen demanded. I felt like Charlie Brown, forever trying to kick the football as Karen. Lucy pulled it away at the last second. Then came the final blow. Karen emailed me with the subject, official HOA property map. When I opened the attached file, my blood ran cold. According to this map, the entire shoreline, including the area directly behind my cabin, belonged to the OA. Not just shared spaces or common walkways, but the entire lakefront, stripping me of access to the water. I read and read the document, disbelief clouding my thoughts. How could I have paid $500,000 for a lakefront cabin and not have the right to touch the lake? 2 days later, determined to test Karen's intimidation, I decided to walk down to the water. On a calm morning, I stepped off my deck, moving slowly toward the water, telling myself, you own this land. You bought this freedom. I planned to dip my feet in, take a photo, and go back inside to research how to fight HOA overreach. Halfway there, Karen appeared as if from thin air. She emerged clutching her clipboard and phone, eyes sparkling with triumph. Stop right there. You are trespassing on HOA property. She had papers, her phone recording, acting like she was a wildlife documentarian catching a rare creature. I'm calling the police to report criminal trespass. Trying to remain calm, I replied, ma'am, this is literally my backyard. I just want to touch the water. But she held up a finger for silence, calling 911. Yes, we need immediate police response. Trespasser in Lakeside Meadows. 15 minutes later, Officer Johnson arrived, looking even more tired than before. Karen began her practice speech, waving her official map, explaining her interpretation of property boundaries. Officer Johnson studied the map, checked his tablet, looked around, and then approached me, speaking softly. Sir, based on this paperwork, I need you to return to your house. I walked back humiliated under Karen's watchful, satisfied gaze. The $500,000 for a lakefront cabin, and I couldn't even touch the lake. That night, I sat staring at the water through my window, feeling like a prisoner in my own home. But in that silence, a spark of determination returned. No more intimidation. I'm gonna find out the truth. That night, I sat silently by the window, staring at the moonlight shimmering across the lake, feeling like a prisoner in my own dream home. I had paid $500,000 to walk down to the water every morning, to live out the promise I made to myself and to honor the memory of my dad, who always dreamed of lakeside mornings. And now, a woman named Karen was telling me I wasn't allowed near the water I had worked my entire life to earn. But as the anger simmered inside me, I made a promise to myself. I would not let Karen win. I started researching property law, easements, riparian rights, and HOA regulations, diving into forums, county records, and legal articles late into the night. At first it was a maze of legal jargon, but as the pieces slowly came together, I found something odd. This lake was supposed to have permanent public access for all lakeside property owners. On Saturday morning, clutching the fraudulent map Karen had sent me, I decided to knock on Walter's door. He opened it wearing paint, splattered overalls, a coffee mug in one hand, reading glasses perched on his nose. Morning, Jake. What brings you by? I showed him the map, telling him everything: the police call, the dock rejections, the forced retreat from my own backyard. Walter took one look at the map, and a grin slowly spread across his face as he shook his head. Karen really thinks she can scare everyone, huh? This map, Jake, is fake. My heart stopped. You're sure? I'm sure. Come in. It's time you learned the truth. Walter's home felt like a museum of the neighborhood's history, books stacked neatly, faded photographs lining the walls, and boxes filled with old documents organized with a professor's care. He pulled out an old wooden box and retrieved a black and white photograph: a man in a suit sitting at a wooden table, surrounded by what looked like lawyers and officials. Behind them was a hand-painted sign that read, "Public Lake Access Permanent by County Order." Walter tapped the photograph. That's Karen's father, the day he signed away these lakeside lots back in 1963 when his empire collapsed. By state law, any land sold on a lakefront required the preservation of public water access for all lakeside property owners. Karen had known this for years but was using fake documents to intimidate anyone who didn't understand the law. A surge of hope washed over me, but Walter's hand on my shoulder was a reminder of reality. But to win, Jake, you'll need proof from the county, not just my word or this photograph. This was bigger than me now. It was about an entire community that had been scammed by Karen for 15 years. Monday morning, Walter and I headed to the county courthouse, navigating down to the dusty basement where the records were stored. Sarah, the county records clerk, a kind woman with a love for old documents, carefully pulled out boxes from the 1960s, handling them as if they were precious artifacts. Flipping through faded typewritten pages, she paused, squinting through a magnifying glass, and smiled. Here it is, Henry Cross Property Subdivision, 1963. There, buried in legal language, were the words that made my pulse race. Permanent public access to lake waters shall be preserved in perpetuity for all lakefront property owners. I clutched the document, my hands trembling with a mix of anger and vindication. Karen had lied to all of us. But Sarah reminded me. For court, you'll need a professional land survey to verify these boundaries are still accurate. I contacted a survey company specializing in historical disputes, and the quote made my stomach drop. $3,000, my entire savings for furniture and repairs. But what choice did I have? I signed the contract without hesitation. While waiting for the survey results, I turned to HOA financial records, which they were legally obligated to make public. What I discovered made my blood boil. For 15 years the HOA had been collecting $50 a month from 47 households under lake maintenance fees totaling $47,000. Yet there were no receipts, no maintenance contracts, no evidence of work done on the lake. The funds were categorized under vague labels like administrative expenses and community improvements, with nothing in the neighborhood to show for it. Or $47,000 had vanished. 1 week later, I received the call that would change everything. Mr. Morrison, we've completed your survey, the voice said. Your lake access is 100% legal and documented. The easement is valid and even broader than most current lake access laws. Then the surveyor's tone shifted. We also found something about those HOA fees you mentioned. According to our research, the HOA has never owned any part of the lake. They've been collecting fees on property they have no right to manage. This was no longer about a dock. It was about justice for the entire community. I knew I couldn't fight Karen by arguing or shouting. I needed her to trap herself in her own arrogance. So I pretended to give up. I walked around the neighborhood looking defeated, avoided eye contact, and made sure Karen saw me looking broken. Karen, thinking she had won, became even more brazen, putting up HOA property, no trespassing signs around the lake, strutting on her morning walks as if she owned the water. The community began whispering about her behavior, and then, Karen made her fatal mistake. I received an email with the subject line, Final Resolution of Property Dispute. The message was direct. Mr. Morrison, your residence violates established community water access protocols. Cabin removal procedures will commence within 30 days. This is your final notice. Signed by Karen. Karen had just signed her own downfall, with her signature and HA letterhead. She had no idea what was coming next. Dence's illegally installing structures on HOA property in direct violation of community standards. Karen stood on the sidewalk, phone in hand, shouting just loud enough for the entire block to hear. He's been warned. He's breaking our rules, and I will not allow it. I stepped out onto my porch, clipboard in hand, completely calm, looking at Karen like she was a weak gust of wind against the wall of evidence I held. 15 minutes later, Officer Johnson arrived, stepping out of his patrol car looking exhausted. Morning, Karen. What's going on today? Karen jumped straight into her rehearsed speech, shoving her manila folder and fake HOA map at him. Officer, you see it, right? He's constructing illegal structures, defying HOA property rights. I demand immediate enforcement. I let her finish her performance before calmly stepping forward, handing Officer Johnson my folder. Officer, here are the official county surveyor's reports, the 1963 historical property records, and all the valid county permits for this installation. I saw Karen's confident posture start to tremble as Officer Johnson flipped through my documents, seeing the red county seals and official letterheads, cross-referencing the fake HOA map she had given him with the real survey and property boundaries. The silence was heavy, the air thick as Karen realized her entire lie was unraveling in front of her. Finally, Officer Johnson looked up and spoke firmly. Karen, according to these official county documents, this is private property with grandfathered lake access rights. Mr. Morrison is well within his legal rights to install this gate. Karen's face drained of color, her lips trembling. By now, neighbors had gathered, standing on driveways, phones raised, recording every second for their social media feeds. I took a step forward, raising my voice for everyone to hear. Everyone, it's time we all knew the truth about this HOA. I held up the financial records I had uncovered. For 15 years, We've all been paying $50 a month for lake maintenance fees. That's a 47,000 collected under the pretense of maintaining this lake. Then I held up the official survey. According to county records, the HOA never owned this lake, any part of it. They had no legal right to manage it or charge us a single dollar. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, eyes widening as people processed what they were hearing. What? $47,000, yelled the man with the kayak. We paid over $9,000 over the years, shouted a woman, her voice shaking. Karen, where did the money go? Another neighbor demanded, phone camera pointed directly at her. Karen took a step back, clutching her folder, voice quivering. I was trying to protect the community, to preserve what my father built. But no one was buying it. Protect what? A woman snapped. You banned us from the lake and charged us for it. You stole from us for 15 years. Another voice yelled. Karen's eyes welled with tears, but there was no sympathy left in the crowd. At that moment, Walter stepped forward, holding up the black and white photo from 1963. Karen, your father signed the papers that sold this land, and behind him was a sign that read, Public Lake Access, permanent by county order. You've known the truth for years. I walked to the steel gate being installed, mounting the bronze plaque I had made, Public Lake Access, grandfathered easement, 1963. HOA has no authority. Then, holding up the remote, I pressed the button. The gate slid shut with a satisfying metallic clank, a sound that was louder than Karen's authority, louder than her fake rules, louder than her control. Karen stood frozen, watching her power close in her face. Neighbors began cheering, shouting, hugging, a woman broke down in tears, and others began chanting about suing the HOA. One neighbor called the state attorney general's office to report the fraud, while another was already looking up class action attorneys on her phone. Children ran toward the lake, giggling, splashing into the water they had been kept away from for so many years. Mom, we can finally swim. Parents followed, tears of relief in their eyes, realizing they could finally enjoy the property they had been paying for. I turned to Walter and handed him the gate remote. For the neighbor who had the courage to tell the truth when it mattered. Walter took it with tears brimming in his eyes, gripping my hand tightly. That evening, videos of Karen's meltdown and my gate closing went viral across local Facebook groups, TikTok, and Nextdoor with the caption, Karen exposed, HA scam crushed in front of the entire neighborhood. People from across the state started sharing their HOA horror stories using phenokarma, inspired to take back their rights. Sometimes, David really does beat Goliath. Sometimes it's not just about winning a personal battle, but about restoring justice for everyone who has been wronged, even when the system feels rigged against you. The lake now belonged to all of us again, exactly as it was meant to. Karen didn't leave her house for 2 days after the showdown. The neighborhood was buzzing, the videos of her meltdown circulating like wildfire. Every street corner conversation started with, "Did you see Karen's face when the officer read the documents?" Or, "I can't believe we've been paying her for 15 years. But this wasn't over. Because Karen, despite the crushing public humiliation, wasn't the type to surrender. She sent out an email blast to the community, her language dripping with defensive pride and desperation. The recent actions taken by certain residents are a direct threat to the community's safety and standards we have all worked hard to maintain. We must stand firm to protect Lakeside Meadows. The comments under her post were brutal. Protect what, Karen? Our wallets. You stole from us, Karen. Step down. Karen tried one last power move. She filed a lawsuit claiming that the installation of my gate violated community harmony, seeking an injunction for removal. But here was the problem for Karen: the lawsuit made the fraudulent fees and fake HOA map public record. Within a week, local reporters showed up, knocking on doors, interviewing neighbors about HOA fees, the lake access, and Karen's history. A journalist from the local paper interviewed me on my porch, and I handed over the official documents, survey reports, Walter's photo, and copies of the OA's fee collection records. Karen was about to face something she couldn't control, the court of public opinion. The HOA board called an emergency meeting to address concerns regarding community leadership. For the first time in years, nearly every household showed up. The room was packed, people standing in the back, many holding printouts of the county property documents I had shared, others scrolling through videos on their phones, ready to confront Karen. She sat at the front table, her face pale, hands trembling as she shuffled her papers, trying to maintain composure. I raised my hand to speak, the room falling silent. Karen, for 15 years collected $50 a month from every family here for lake maintenance on a lake you don't own. You enforced rules that never existed. You used fear and bureaucracy to control this neighborhood. And when confronted with the truth, you tried to evict me from my own home. A people nodded, their faces tight with anger. We have proof. We have the county documents. We have video evidence. We have your emails. You lied, Karen. Karen tried to speak, her voice cracking. I did what I thought was best. But people were done listening to excuses. The woman from House 12 stood up. You stole from us. My husband and I skipped vacations, fixed our own plumbing to afford HOA fees, and you were lying the whole time. The elderly couple with the kayaks spoke next. We stopped using the lake because of your threats, Karen. You ruined the joy we moved here for. Walter stood holding up the black and white photo. I've been silent too long. Karen knew exactly what her father signed in 1963. She's known for years. The OA treasurer, who had never spoken up against Karen before, looked down at the floor and whispered, the financial records, they're all true. We never spent that money on the lake. A vote was called. All in favor of removing Karen from her position. Say aye. The room erupted in a unified aye, the sound shaking the walls. Karen's head dropped, tears sliding down her cheeks as she realized it was over. She had lost everything she had built her false power on. After the vote, neighbors gathered in the parking lot, hugging, laughing, and finally letting go of the fear Karen had held over them for so long. We're free now. Someone whispered. We can use the lake, said another, wiping tears from her eyes. I approached Karen as she packed up her folder, her hands shaking. Karen, it didn't have to be like this. She looked up at me, eyes hollow. My father built this place. I thought I was protecting it. You protected your power, not the community. She couldn't respond, turning away, the weight of 15 years of lies finally crashing down on her. The next day, neighbors began to reclaim the lake. Families brought out kayaks, paddleboards, and picnic blankets. Children screamed with joy as they jumped into the water for the first time in years without fear of violating HOA rules. A Walter sat on the dock, fishing pole in hand, the bronze plaque glinting in the sun. Public lake access. Grandfathered easement 1963. OA has no authority. The sense of community returned to Lakeside Meadows, stronger than it had ever been under Karen's reign. The lawsuit Karen filed. It was dismissed in court within weeks after the judge reviewed the property records and the easement documentation. Instead, Karen found herself facing a class action lawsuit from the community, seeking the return of the $47,000 in fraudulent fees she had collected. The local newspaper ran the headline, Neighborhood Hero Exposes 15-Year Fraud, Karen Removed from Power. My inbox filled with messages from people across the country. Thank you for standing up. You inspired us to fight back against our abusive OA. Sometimes David really does beat Goliath. But the best moment came a week later. As I walked down to the lake, coffee in hand, I saw a little girl standing at the water's edge. She turned to her mother and asked, Mom, are we allowed to play here now? Her mother smiled, tears in her eyes. Yes, sweetheart. We're allowed now. That was the moment it was all worth it. Because sometimes it's not about winning a fight with a petty tyrant. Sometimes, it's about restoring hope, rebuilding trust, and reclaiming what was always rightfully yours. And as the sun set over the lake, painting the water in gold, the community of Lakeside Meadows was finally truly free. Karen was gone. The steel gate stood tall, a symbol of quiet victory over years of fear and silence. Her HOA notices no longer fluttered on doors, her early morning threats no longer whispered along the sidewalks. But justice was not finished. After the vote to remove her, the residents of Lakeside Meadows came together to file a class action lawsuit demanding the return of the $47,000 Karen had wrongfully collected over 15 years. Walter, the elderly kayak couple, the woman from House 12, and I took turns driving to the county courthouse, submitting documentation, logging every dollar each household had paid, and matching it with the financial records I had uncovered. When the county lawyer read our case, she shook her head in disbelief. You've done what most neighborhoods are too scared to do. Because OA fraud hides behind paperwork and fear. Fear of retaliation. Fear of endless code violations. But Lakeside Meadows had run out of fear. Karen, meanwhile, vanished quietly. Selling her house and disappearing, leaving the chaos she created behind. The lake, which had always been clear, now reflected something brighter: laughter, community, freedom. One crisp Saturday morning, I walked down to the lake with a coffee. Finding Walter already there, fishing rod in hand, the tip bending as a fish tugged. He turned, eyes soft, and said, The kids will grow up by this lake again like mine once did. It was worth it. Children ran across the grass, their laughter echoing where silence used to reign. Families gathered with picnic blankets, kayaks returned to the water, and neighbors planned sunrise paddles, instead of avoiding the shoreline. The woman from House 12 approached me, her eyes glistening. I never thought we could fight back, but you made us believe. I shook my head, smiling. Not me. All of us, together. Our story began to spread, first through local Facebook groups, then HOA forums, becoming an example for other neighborhoods suffering under petty tyrants like Karen. One evening, Walter knocked on my door, holding an old wooden box. "You should keep this." Inside was the black and white photo of Henry, Karen's father, signing the 1963 Public Lake Access Agreement. "To remind you," Walter said, "that freedom here was always ours, not hers." I framed the photo and hung it in my entryway, a daily reminder that our rights were won by unity, not fear. 4 months later, we got the news the court ordered the old HOA to return the 47,000, with added penalties and legal fees. Every family received their portion back, and one couple told me, "We're using this money to finally teach our daughter to swim. She's been afraid of the water, but now that it's truly ours, she deserves to learn." On a golden evening, I walked by the lake as the sunset rippled across the water. It struck me then, it wasn't about defeating Karen, it was about restoring hope. Walter waved me over one evening. "Bonfire tonight by the lake. You should come." I showed up with marshmallows, finding neighbors gathered around the flames, sharing stories of the day Karen fell, like it was a neighborhood legend. A small girl tugged at my sleeve asking, "Mr. Jake, were you scared of Karen?" I knelt down smiling. I was. But together, we had nothing to be afraid of. The fire crackled, faces glowed with warmth, and laughter replaced the hush that had once clouded lakeside meadows. And I realized sometimes, victory isn't about grand gestures. Sometimes, victory is a child's laughter echoing across a lake. It's the freedom to paddle in the morning light. It's reclaiming your neighborhood from fear. That night, I returned to my cabin under a sky alive with stars, the cool breeze of the lake on my face, knowing Lakeside Meadows was finally, truly, home. That night, I set up my camera and recorded a short video. I filmed the kids running around the lakeshore, their laughter echoing, Walter strumming his guitar under the porch light, and kayaks gliding gently across the calm water reflecting the night sky. I looked straight into the camera, my voice calm but unwavering. This isn't just my story. It's the story of all of us who've been blinded by petty rules and Karens, who think they hold unlimited power. And then one day, we stand up and take back what was always ours. I smiled softly and held up the remote, pressing the button to close the steel gate, our symbol of justice. The gate clicked shut with a sharp, final clang in the quiet night, clean, decisive. Have you ever faced an HOA? Or a Karen? Who overstepped their power? Would you stand up for your rights, even if it means going up against the entire system alone? Drop a comment saying a JUSTE, if you're ready to fight for what's right. And don't forget to hit subscribe for more HOA stories and real community justice. Because sometimes David really does beat Goliath. And justice will always find the light. I turned off the camera and took one last look at the lake before stepping back into the cabin. My heart felt light, knowing this wasn't just about reclaiming the lake, it was about reigniting hope for an entire community. The lake now belongs to all of us, just as it was always meant to.